So, was fire discovered by accident? The short answer is yes and no. It's a messy question because it wasn't one event. It was a very long, slow dance between us and a force of nature. The first time an early human saw fire, it was almost certainly an accident. A lightning strike, a volcano, a raging wildfire sweeping across the savannah. But the journey from seeing fire to using it, controlling it, and finally making it, that was no accident. That was one of the greatest stories of ingenuity in the history of life on Earth. It's a story that changed our bodies, our minds, and our entire world. It's the story of how we became human. Imagine a world without it. A world of total darkness when the sun goes down. A world where the only warmth is the sun on your skin. A world where every night brings the risk of predators, their eyes glowing just beyond the edge of your perception. Food is tough, raw, and often full of parasites. Life is short, cold, and lived in constant fear. That was the world of our ancestors for millions of years. They were not at the top of the food chain. They were often the hunted, not the hunters. They huddled together in the dark, listening to the sounds of things that wanted to eat them. Then one day, something happened. A bolt of lightning hit a dry tree. The tree exploded in flame. Our ancestors, maybe a group of Homo erectus 1.5 million years ago, would have seen this. Their first instinct was surely fear. Fire is terrifying. It's loud, it's hot, it moves unpredictably, and it destroys everything in its path. They would have run. Anything with a functioning nervous system runs from a wildfire. But we are curious creatures, and we are smart. After the fire passed, some of them might have crept back to the scar it left on the landscape. They would have found a changed world. The ground was black. Trees were smoldering skeletons. And maybe, just maybe, they found the carcass of an animal caught in the blaze. A deer, a boar, something. The smell would have been incredible. The meat, instead of being tough and bloody, was tender. It was warm. It practically fell off the bone. This was a revelation. This was perhaps the first accidental discovery, not of fire itself, but of what fire could do. Cooked food. It's hard to overstate how important this was. Cooking is a form of pre-digestion. It breaks down tough fibers and proteins, making them easier for our bodies to absorb. It unlocks calories and nutrients that are otherwise inaccessible in raw plants and meat. It also kills bacteria and parasites. Suddenly, food was not just easier to eat, it was safer and more nutritious. This was the first step. The observation, fire makes food better, but this was still opportunistic. They were scavengers of nature's kitchen. They were following fires, not controlling them. They were taking advantage of a natural event. The real leap, the one that started to separate us from every other animal, was the next step. Someone, somewhere, had an idea. Instead of just finding the results of a fire, what if we could keep a piece of it? And what if we could take that smoldering branch from the lightning-struck tree and bring it back to our camp? This was a terrifying thought, bringing the destroyer, the monster, into your home. It required a huge cognitive jump. It required moving past pure instinct and into the realm of planning and control. Think of the courage that must have taken to reach into the heat, grab a burning stick, and carry it. To not drop it when it burned your hand. To get it back to a cave or a clearing and set it down carefully. And then, the next challenge. How do you keep it alive? Fire is hungry. It needs to be fed. It needs fuel, dry grass, twigs, branches, logs. It needs oxygen. It dies in the rain. It dies if you smother it. It dies if you let it starve. For the first time, our ancestors had a responsibility that wasn't just finding food or avoiding predators. They had to tend the flame. This was a full-time job. Someone had to be the firekeeper. They had to guard it, protect it, and feed it around the clock. If the fire went out, they were back in the cold and the dark, waiting for another lightning strike. This was the beginning of control. Not creation, but control, and it changed everything. The camp was no longer just a place to sleep. It became a home. The fire provided warmth, a precious commodity on cold nights or in colder climates. It provided light, pushing back the darkness and extending the day. This was a fundamental shift in the rhythm of life. Before, activity stopped at sunset. Now, with a fire pit glowing at the center of the camp, people could work, make tools, and socialize long into the night. Most importantly, the fire provided security. Predators like saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas are wary of fire. They don't understand it, and it scares them. A ring of fire around a camp was a wall of safety. For the first time, our ancestors could sleep with a bit more peace, less terrified of what was lurking just beyond their sight. The hearth became a sanctuary. How do we know any of this? We can't go back in time. The proof is in the ground. Archaeologists dig for clues. They look for evidence of fire that is not natural. A wildfire leaves a wide, shallow layer of ash. A human-controlled fire is different. It's concentrated. It's in one spot, a hearth. It's often in a cave or a sheltered area where a natural fire is unlikely to burn. Scientists find layers of compacted ash year after year in the same place. Okay. They find charred animal bones, but not just any charred bones. They find bones with cut marks on them from stone tools, then they were burned. This means the animal was butchered first and then cooked. That's not a wildfire. That's a barbecue. They find collections of fire-cracked rocks, which might have been used to line a hearth or even to heat water in skin bags. Some of the earliest, most convincing evidence for the control of fire comes from a place called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Here deep inside the cave, scientists found burned plant remains and bone fragments. They dated this material to about 1 million years ago. The location so far from the cave entrance makes it almost certain that this fire was carried in and maintained by hominins, likely Homo erectus. Another site in Israel called Gesher Benot Yaakov shows evidence of hearths from around 800,000 years ago. Here, they found clusters of burned seeds, wood, and flint, suggesting that specific spots were used for fire again and again. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a behavior, a tradition, passed down through generations. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the state of things. We were fire keepers, not fire makers. We were still dependent on nature to provide the initial spark. A tribe's most precious possession was its fire. If it went out, it was a catastrophe. They would have to find another group and beg for an ember, or journey for days, hoping to find a natural fire to rekindle their own. Fire was life, and losing it was a kind of death. This long relationship with controlled fire didn't just change how we lived. It literally changed our bodies. It drove our evolution. Let's go back to the food. Cooking makes food soft. Our ancestors no longer needed massive jaws and huge grinding molar teeth to process tough, raw meat and fibrous plants. Over thousands of generations, our jaws began to shrink, our teeth got smaller, the powerful chewing muscles that anchored to the top of our skulls got weaker. You can see this in the fossil record. The skulls of early hominins have huge brow ridges and sagittal crests, a ridge of bone on top of the skull where massive jaw muscles attached. The skulls of Homo erectus, the species that likely first tamed fire, are smaller in the jaw area. Our own skulls, as Homo sapiens, have flat faces and tiny jaws in comparison. This change in skull architecture had a wonderful side effect. With smaller muscles and less robust facial bones, there was more room for the brain to grow. And cooking provided the fuel for that growth. The human brain is an incredibly expensive organ. It makes up only about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes about 20% of our energy when we are at rest. For a big brain to evolve, you need a steady supply of high-quality, easily digestible calories. Cooking provided that. Think of your body as having an energy budget. You can spend it on digesting tough food, or you can spend it on thinking. This is sometimes called the expensive tissue hypothesis. A big gut to digest raw food costs a lot of energy. A big brain also costs a lot. It's hard to afford both. By cooking our food, we essentially outsource the first part of digestion to the fire. Our guts could get smaller and more efficient, and the energy saved could be rerouted to power a bigger, more complex brain. Fire didn't just warm our hands, it fed our minds. The changes didn't stop there. The hearth, that central campfire, became the center of our social world. It was the first living room. It was the first television. People gathered around it. In the safety and light of the fire, new things became possible. Think about language. Language is complex. It's not just grunts and gestures. It's about sharing ideas, telling stories, planning for the future. It's hard to imagine complex language evolving in small groups scattered in the darkness, constantly on alert for predators. But around a fire, people could relax, they could see each other's faces, read expressions, and communicate. The long hours of the evening, once a time of fear, became a time for connection. This is where culture may have truly begun. Elders could pass on knowledge to the young. Hunters could coordinate their plans for the next day. People could share stories of the day's events, of their ancestors, of the spirits they believed in. The fire was a crucible for cooperation and community. It also encouraged a division of labor. Some individuals were better at hunting, some were better at gathering plants, some were better at making tools, and some were tasked with the vital role of tending the fire. This specialization makes a group more efficient and resilient. It requires trust and communication. The fire became the anchor point for a more complex and organized society. For hundreds of thousands of years, we lived this way. We were masters of controlling fire, but we were not yet its creators. We were still reliant on nature's accidental gift. The final step in our journey with fire was the most revolutionary of all, making it from scratch. This was another massive intellectual leap. It's one thing to understand how to keep a fire going. It's another thing entirely to understand how to create it from nothing. It requires a deep understanding of physics and materials. It requires foresight, patience, and practice. It means you are no longer a scavenger of flames. You are a creator. You have mastered the process. There are two main ways our ancestors learned to make fire. The first is through friction. Rubbing two pieces of wood together generates heat. If you do it with the right kind of wood, with the right pressure and speed, you can create a small, glowing ember in a pile of dry tinder. The methods, like the fire drill or the fire plow, are incredibly difficult. It's not just a matter of rubbing sticks. You need to know which woods work best. You need to prepare your tinder shredded bark, dry grass, fungi. You have to work tirelessly, often for a long time, to produce a single tiny spark of life. The second method is percussion. This involves striking a specific type of rock, like flint, against another rock that contains iron, like pyrite. This action shaves off a tiny fleck of iron, which heats up from the friction and ignites in the air, creating a spark. You then have to catch that spark in a piece of tinder, like char cloth or a specific kind of fungus, and gently blow it into a flame. This also requires skill and the right materials. You have to know which rocks to look for. You have to know how to strike them at the right angle. When did we figure this out? The evidence is harder to find. A fire drill leaves no archaeological trace. But we have some clues. At a site in Israel, there's evidence of hearths and burned flint from around 400,000 years ago, which some researchers think might be a sign of early fire making. By the time of the Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, the evidence becomes much more common. They were not just controlling fire, they were making it wherever they went. The ability to make fire on demand was true freedom. It was the ultimate survival tool. Humans were no longer tied to a single, perpetually burning hearth. They could travel. They could move into colder climates, into deep forests, into new continents. If their fire went out in a storm, they could simply make another one. They could carry the knowledge of fire with them, not just a burning ember. This unlocked the entire planet for human settlement. From the frozen tundra of Siberia to the dense jungles of the Amazon, humans brought their fire with them. It was our constant companion, our portable piece of the sun. Fire also became our first great tool for engineering the environment. With fire, we could clear forests to encourage the growth of edible plants or to create grasslands that would attract game animals. This was the very beginning of agriculture and landscape management. We were no longer just living in the world, we were actively shaping it to suit our needs. Of course, fire is a double-edged sword. The power to create is also the power to destroy. A carelessly tended campfire could burn down a forest. Fire could be used as a weapon in conflicts between groups. It brought with it new dangerous burns, smoke inhalation, and the constant work of gathering fuel. Our mastery of fire was not without its costs. It was a heavy responsibility, and it still is. So, let's go back to the original question. Was it an accident? The first spark was an accident of nature. The first taste of cooked meat was an accident of circumstance. The first realization that this strange, powerful thing could be useful, that was a moment of pure accidental discovery. It was a gift. But what we did with that gift was not an accident. The decision to carry a burning branch back to camp was an act of deliberate courage. The generations of trial and error it took to learn how to shoot, how to keep it alive through wind and rain, was a testament to our persistence. The social structures we built around the hearth were a product of our growing intelligence and cooperation. And the final step, the discovery that we could create this power ourselves, from rubbing two sticks together or striking two stones, that was the pinnacle of our early ingenuity. That was the result of countless hours of observation, experimentation, and shared knowledge. It was a conscious, deliberate solving of one of life's greatest puzzles. The story of fire is the story of a slow, burning revolution. It began with a chance encounter with a natural phenomenon. It evolved into a relationship of dependency and control. It culminated in mastery and creation. Fire didn't just give us warmth and light. It gave us better food, which gave us bigger brains. It gave us safety, which gave us a more complex society. It gave us a tool to reshape the world. When we look at a flame today, whether it's in a fireplace, a candle, or a campfire, we are looking back in time. We are seeing the same light that our ancestors huddled around a million years ago. We are feeling the same warmth that allowed them to survive ice ages. That simple flame is a direct link to the single most important discovery our species ever made. It was born from an accident, but it was nurtured by purpose, and in its glow we became who we are.